Can you hear me now? Okay. Sorry about this. So, colleagues, good afternoon. On behalf of the ADB and NDC partnership, I'm very much honored to welcome you to this very important discussion on advancing transition beyond coal. So, thank you for joining us today. In 1992, global community came together in Rio, Brazil, to commit to address climate change. In the 3 decades that passed since we made this commitment, we have made progress in setting mitigation, adaptation, and finance targets, and in taking steps towards achieving them. However, the first global stocktake and similar assessments conducted by other stakeholders remind us of a stark reality. We are still far from where we need to be, and we're not moving fast enough. We need to be more ambitious, and we need to act fast and wide. While bridging the gap between ambition and implementation is urgent, we must also remember to ensure that people remain at the heart of the transformations. Just transition is about making sure that transformations towards low carbon, resilient, and sustainable economies and societies are fair and inclusive. With transformations presenting both opportunities and risks, commitment to justice means making sure that we put the people in a position to take advantage of the opportunities and meaningfully participate in the process, while also minimizing the risks and avoid making existing vulnerabilities worse or creating new ones. Much of the global conversation has focused on moving away from coal. While this is critical, we know that transformations need to happen globally, systematically, and across all sectors of the economies, and with everyone playing unique and important roles. These changes will bring both challenges and opportunities, and they will look different across countries and contexts. So with diversified economies and vulnerabilities, Asia and the Pacific will need tailored approaches that align climate ambition with development priorities. So today's panel brings together representatives from the governments, think tanks, and other development partners to share their stories and initiatives on what just transition look beyond coal. We look forward to explore diverse strategies and resources leveraged to catalyze the transformations and uncover lessons that can inspire broad action. So, for this discussion, I hope that we can deepen our conversation on alternative transition contexts and pathways, expand the range of solutions being developed, and bring more stakeholders to deliver just transition at scale. Let me emphasize in conclusion that just transition is not a choice, it's a necessity. The transformation ahead must be fair, inclusive, and people-oriented. They must create opportunities, protect livelihoods, and strengthen resilience. So please, let's join me in hearing and learning from the panel on how we can see these pockets of success into systematic and expansive transformations that leave no one behind. Thank you.
Yevgeny, thank you so much for kicking us off and taking us back to another meeting in Brazil, in Rio. So I'll be moderating this panel. To my left, we have Kate Hughes, Principal Climate Change Specialist at the ADB. So in a sense, our host here. We're waiting for Genevieve Jiva, who is the climate change lead at Fiji and leads for AOSIS on just transition. We then have Janne Peljo, who is Chief Policy Advisor from the Confederation of Finnish Industry. And then we have Heli Sandenis, who's Head of Just Transitions at the Institute of Human Rights and Business. And then to my right, we have Jacob Joppel, who is Lead for External Relations and Partnerships at the Climate Investment Funds. So just to build on what I think we've heard from Yevgeny, clearly the coal to clean transition has been a focus and is potentially the most important area for the transition away from fossil fuels. But we need to think about other sectors, and we will be looking at that here. So agriculture, buildings, transport, industry, and maybe minerals and so on. We need to take this whole of society approach, workers and trade unions, communities, indigenous peoples, women, youth, and make that real. We need to be thinking very much about the participation of people, to give people agency so they can shape the decisions, think ahead and anticipate, and really think how this transition can move beyond leaving no one behind to actually thinking about really developing positive development benefits. And all of that needs money, which is why the Asia Development Bank is sponsoring this discussion. And we have the GCF as well. SIF. SIF. Sorry, we have the SIF, and of course you are totally independent. That's right. So I'm going to kick off with some initial questions, and maybe to start with you then, Jacob, about how you, in the way you've been designing and implementing SIF programs, very much in your coal programs, Just Transition is very central, but in your other programs on agriculture, on your latest program on industrial decarbonization, how does Just Transition come through in the way you're designing those programs? So apologies again, and go ahead.
Hi, can people hear me? Is that fine? Yeah. Well, look, thank you very much, and thanks for the opportunity to be here. And don't worry about mixing us up with the Green Climate Fund. Understanding the alphabet soup of the climate finance architecture is very difficult. There's GCF, there's JEF, there's the Adaptation Fund, now there's the Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage, and then there's the SIF. And just quickly, for those who may not know, the SIF is the largest pool of concessional finance that exclusively and directly supports the multilateral development banks, pushing them into these tougher areas in the climate crisis that are very difficult for them to go into on their own because of the risk profile nature of those sorts of investments. Recognizing where the Philippines was in its evolution, as well as a host of other big emitters across Asia and the rest of the world, in concert with the G7, G20, and the COP of that year of Glasgow, we launched a huge program, a global program to address the acceleration of coal transition. The Philippines being one of the most climate vulnerable countries on the planet, with increasing energy demands, and having, I think, 58% of its energy locked into coal as of 2023, which was a significant increase. These sorts of programs are vital to ensure that countries would get the opportunity to design and implement and develop frameworks buttressed by concessional finance and technical assistance to in partnership with the World Bank, Asian Development Bank, and IFC to explore the phase-out of coal-fired plants for the first time. This is a novel program, and that's what the SIF does. It tackles those tough areas. The program isn't just about knocking out coal. It's about ensuring just transitions. We look at the differentiated impacts across all vulnerable groups, including women, local communities, and to ensure their just transitions, to ensure that they are reskilled, upskilled, jobs are available, including social protection measures. But that's just one component. There's, of course, the infrastructure component, of which we're all aware, which is the pushing countries into alternatives, cost-competitive renewable energy alternatives, with the repurposed assets, but of course also the governance side. For us, pursuing transformational impact comes with not just the finance and not just the capacity, but the enabling environment and the policy level. Let me stop there.
Okay, Jacob, that's really good. That's where you started. I think we're going to come back to you and look about the non-coal areas as well, but let's do that. So Kate, as one of the Asia Development Banks, the development banks as a whole have a set of just transition principles. You've been pushing us ahead of that. You have a just transition facility. One of the areas that is hard, whether in the coal area or in these other sectors, is actually the financing aspects, both across your portfolio and then maybe dedicated just transition areas. So maybe what are your lessons and what really do we need to do next?
Got to share the microphone. Yeah, so just transition finance has actually been very interesting kind of conversation within ADB and working out actually what it is. So the topic of climate finance is well developed, right? The conversation on climate finance is well developed. Parts of just transition overlap very clearly with the discussion on climate finance, but then there's other aspects that are non-climate related activities, but that are clearly needed for just transition. And so how do you look more holistically at the type of finance that's required for just transition and align those different types of finance with a just transition plan? And so really that's what we're trying to do. So we've sort of come up with maybe three types of finance that we think works for just transition. So one is just transition aligned investments, right? So that's projects that contribute to climate action, but that you ensure that you have a strong just transition element as part of those projects. And then that does get to the point where it kind of crosses over into safeguards. So making sure that we don't duplicate existing systems, but that we go beyond that. Then you have complementary investments. And actually, I think that's where you can harness the kind of power of multilateral development banks because, for example, we have already operations in reskilling, in green skills, we have education, we have health. We have a very broad portfolio and areas of work, and so we need to support countries to put in place the transition planning so that then they can bring in those different types of investments. And so also for ADB, it means we need to work not just with our sector colleagues that are working in climate related sector activities, but also social colleagues and others. But then we've realized that the ability to kind of pair that financing with strong transition planning is one of the areas where countries need a lot of help. So we're also now looking at how we can do programmatic support where we provide the technical assistance to put together a clear kind of program of investments that needs to work together and then see if we can mobilize financing, the right type of finance for the right type of investments along that plan.
So the programmatic investment, just for clarity, is the third strand of this. Yeah. And would that have a particular sort of place or regional aspect to it or sectoral in the country? What do you mean by the sort of programmatic?
Sure. So, I mean, ADB works across the Asia Pacific region. When we first started looking at just transition, we also went to coal because that's where, the demand and a lot of the discussion. But we've clearly realized that it's required in many sectors. So, for example, in Pakistan, ADB is doing a lot of work around mechanization of agriculture. But most of the people that work in the agriculture sector are women, informal farmers. And so through going from manual labor for rice planting or other crops to mechanization means you're going to have a big just transition component. So that's one example. Another example, unfortunately our colleague from the Pacific couldn't join, but maybe I can talk to it, is that for the Pacific, they're not big emitters, right? So their transitions are not necessarily going to be around decarbonisation. They've obviously got a lot of investments to make for resilience, but they do have issues around renewable energy, trade, fossil fuel subsidies, all of those sorts of things. So for them, we're trying to look at what just transition looks like in a different regional context and what type of kind of investments and projects they might need to support that.
So in terms of numbers, the big number here at COP is 1.3 trillion. The number that emerging markets and developing countries need each year by 2035 for clean energy, for loss and damage, for adaptation, for nature, and just transition. And I think what is interesting is maybe your first area is just transition aligned. All 1.3 trillion has to be aligned with the just transition. But then there will be specific areas, and the number coming out of the work on the 1.3 trillion is 50 billion on just transition for all emerging and developing countries. That sounds like a very small number. So maybe that's the right number, But that would maybe fit into your complementary areas. And maybe, as you're suggesting, maybe there are other investments which actually go beyond the realm of climate finance. But anyway, I think that's the sort of discussion we're thinking about. So thank you very much. Yanne, if I may, I'm going to jump across and call on Haley first. Haley, you work at the Institute for Human Rights and Business. So you work with business as delivery of just transition, but also very much engaging with rights holders to ensure that they're actively involved in this. And one of the really inspiring things you've done, as well as working in country in different areas, different sectors, is bringing this to life through a series of stories and case studies of how these tricky things of just transitions come together. So it'd be really interesting for you to tell us something. We've already heard from Jacob about from coal. I know some of your cases are coal, but you're going beyond coal to look at other sectors. So what's happening? What are the lessons? And maybe is there a finance piece to that?
Thanks so much, Nick, and thanks everybody for being here. As Nick said, we at IHRB work very closely with business to try and elevate the importance of human rights as essential to everyday business, as core to what it means to operate successfully. And so when the just transition really came through the last several years as a core climate strategy, for us, we really see it as essential to economic strategy. And so in every region that we work, as Nick said, in coal economies like South Africa and Indonesia, but also in other non-energy sectors like the salt belt of India or agroforestry systems in Brazil, we're really seeing a consistent pattern emerging now. And it's important to say consistent pattern because I think for a long time we've struggled with having enough evidence, right? Transitions are so early that many are still at that sort of policy and commitment phase. And so we've really intentionally sought out transitions that are far enough along in implementation that there's concrete evidence to look at and say, and understand what's working, what's making them so successful. And they're fundamentally human dimensions every single time. But I think what comes through really consistently as a pattern is that the biggest risks in transitions are really not technical or financial. It is the social disruption, the economic disruption that can come from a lack of a just transition approach, whether that's, through increases in informality and job losses, stranded assets, as I say, supply chain instability and social resistance. And so conversely, there is a very big opportunity where, businesses, state-owned enterprises, but also governments engage early with workers, and Nick already emphasized the importance of participation with communities as well to unlock new markets, to reduce the fiscal burden, and to increase investment stability. So really, there's a very strong business case for just transitions as economics, not purely as ethics. And I think that's so important again and again to hammer home. And as Nick said, we do really focus on the power of stories, the power of examples, because I think we as people learn best from seeing our peers and others in action, really learning what made those work and then applying it to our own unique contexts. So we do have a coal story that you're welcome to come grab here, looking at a really successful coal transition happening in Kate's neck of the woods, actually, in Australia, where she hails. But another story I'd like to quickly share is this one. And feel free to come grab. This is a salt transition taking place in Gujarat, India. And you might not know the world's most ubiquitous commodity on literally every single table around the world. India is the third largest producer globally. And in India, salt is almost purely powered through the work of informal women workers. This is in a very remote desert, about 3 hours drive north of Gujarat. If you think Belen is hot, go to Gujarat and go to the salt flats. It's quite extraordinary, the conditions under which these women have farmed salt for generations. And until recently, that was powered by diesel. So they have to bore holes in the ground, pump brine water up, pour it into salt pans bigger than this pavilion, which they then rake on a daily basis for about 6 months until those classic cubes are formed. And so, as I say, for a long time that was powered by diesel. What the Self-Employed Women's Association, a union of 3.2 million women in India, incredibly powerful, did was increase the women's approach to cooperative power. They banded the women together to pool their strength as workers themselves to find a way to actually invest in solar-powered pumps. But that required some really innovative financing to make formal finance work for informal workers. You can imagine these women don't exactly have a postcode to attach any loans to. So how exactly do you get them any kind of financing to invest in solar? So that was a really key barrier to overcome, was access to finance, but also access to technology. And so what SEWA did through their cooperative power was negotiate with finance, with the Bank of Baroda, as well as the IFC, to negotiate first loss guarantees, to de-risk it both for the financier but also for the women. And I can tell you that SEWA has a 100% repayment rate. They are the best loan that's out there. They also worked very hard to engage with the Indian government to actually create an enabling environment for small-scale solar. So they had to innovate a policy environment that previously favored large-scale. And what they did over time was they now have 6,000 solar-powered pumps under operation that slashed emissions overnight, that increased the women's income, in some cases by as much as 600%. And in the off-season, when this desert becomes inaccessible, the women are de-installing and reinstalling their solar panels into India's first female-owned, operated, and maintained solar array, now greening India's grid, all of which was supplied through female-trained solar technicians. So they are arming the next generation of green skills that is such an existential threat to the energy transition. So it's an incredible example of a just transition in action. It's a perfect model for the kinds of innovation that really need to be thought through at the outset, but can create such a positive proof point and success case. And just as a reminder to close, 90% of the global South economies are powered by informal workers. So think about how this model could be scaled globally if even 1% of the world's 2 billion informal workers were given this kind of opportunity to exercise their own agency. That's what we get inspired by when it comes to just transitions, and the examples are everywhere when you start looking for them, and they're the ones that need the attention.
Thank you so much for bringing that particular story. I think it tells us a number of things. Firstly, the just transition is not just dealing with decline. It is actually dealing with progress, and I think this is really interesting. And also, the example you give, I think, gets over this somewhat sterile debate about public and private finance, that actually we need to think of that in a broader way, and particularly think about social finance and cooperative finance and so on. So that was really good. In your discussion, Haley, you actually set up Janne very well, because you were talking about early transitions in the global south. Finland, we were talking earlier, you've actually now reduced your emissions 60% from 1990 levels. So if we're thinking about a football match, we're well into the second half of the game. And it's maybe getting hard, but Janne, Finland's not in Asia, I believe. But it'd be really good to hear some of those lessons on just transition that you've learned from that first half, and what does that mean about how you're delivering it at the Confederation Injury, but also with your social partners in the rest of the game.
Oh, thank you, Nick, and thanks for the invite. Great to be here. Of course, the conditions in Finland are very difficult, different from the global south, but I think we have some valuable learnings that can be shared and copied and adopted to any other geographies as well. I think the key word in Finland is the transition planning. In Finland, we have a very kind of small distances within the society. So the policymakers, employees and employee associations, and also the industries, they collaborate quite shoulder to shoulder in some of the key transition areas. Our policy innovation from the previous government in 2019 was this industrial roadmap towards decarbonization. And how it functions is that basically the government came out with a very ambitious climate target. Finland wants to be climate neutral by 2035, so that's 15 years ahead of the rest of Europe, for example. And then basically the government gave the industries a challenge. So you convene with your employees and specialists and then come back with a plan. So how do you decarbonize your industry, whether that's electricity and heat generation, or whether that's chemical industry or pulp and paper. So what happened was basically that all of these industries, they went back home and they did their homework. They analyzed the different scenarios on how to actually decarbonize as fast as possible, and then what's required to do that. And for us, basically the recipe has been quite simple. First, we've decarbonized the electricity production. 95% of electricity is already fossil-free in Finland. And then we've started electrifying everything. So that's basically the narrative that now, for example, the IEA is talking about. So what's the kind of recipe for decarbonizing the global economy? It's electricity and it's electrification of other industries. So we are a good example on how you actually do that. On coal, the previous government set a target of phasing out coal from heat production and all energy production in Finland by 2029. And back at the time, it was considered outrageous. We're going to freeze in the winter in Finland where coal is used in kind of heat production. But now, just this year, the last coal powered plant was shut down in Finland. So basically, there is no industrial scale coal usage in Finland anymore as of now. So basically, we are 5 years ahead of schedule. And of course, the technology developments, electrification in heating has been helping us quite a lot. But when it boils down to employees, one of the difficulties in this transition path has been actually that we've had quite a lot of engineers operating these coal-powered assets. So there has been reskilling programs in one of the largest energy utilities, helping them to find new employment within the new kind of new industrial activities that we're now seeing to come. So basically that means that as we have decarbonized our heat generation from coal to heat pumps, these engineers are operating some of the largest heat pumps in the world. And that's required, of course, a massive amount of reskilling, but it's a good example of kind of how if you plan ahead well in advance, then the transition is easier for everyone. Now we're also seeing that data centers are being built in Finland at a massive scale. And we are seeing that these plant operators from the coal-powered CHP plants are now becoming reskilled to data center engineers, which is actually quite much more rewarding job in terms of salaries and working conditions. So we are seeing a kind of a remodernization and reindustrialization in Finland because of the climate transition, and we are seeing that to have a significant positive impact on employment for those who are on the sectors that are being phased down. So I hope that's an encouraging example to other countries on how to collaborate between the sectors and then create credible and executable pathways toward decarbonization and take measures to bring everyone on board in the change. Thanks.
Very good. So anticipation, thinking ahead, planning, bringing people, the employers and the workers together. We are now over half time, and I want to give everybody a warning that I want really to close by thinking what we should be getting out of this COP. But I want to come back to you, Jacob, because you started off with coal, and this panel is really beyond coal. I think you've just been launching a new industrial decarbonization area. How are these issues of just transition being incorporated into that? And particularly maybe listening to the rest of the panel, how this question of how could communities as well or other organizations access some of the funding from the CIF, but particularly maybe tell us a bit more about your industrial decarbonization, building on what Janne was saying. Thank you.
Sure. Well, thanks for that prompt. In fact, just maybe zooming out a bit here, as I noted at the front end, you know, our very purpose is to try and challenge, to help address those challenged areas that desperately need support, but are difficult because of the risk profile. And CIF's model, in fact, you know, tries to lower the risk of these sorts of climate solutions for industry, builds a track record in unproven markets, and of course tries to crowd in additional financing to support the transformation of those energy systems and deepens resilience and, of course, protects nature. On industry, there was a real gap in the multilateral climate architecture. The banks weren't really going after this in a concerted effort because, again, how challenging it was. So paired with our concessional and technical assistance envelopes, we were able to launch a global program for the decarbonization of high-emitting sectors that was specifically going after some of these breakthrough agenda items that I'm sure you're aware of, cement, concrete, steel, fertilizer, even supporting industrial parks, green hydrogen. At the end of the day, we have tried to tailor the program towards ensuring an increased proportion of projects through the investment plan will be towards private sector, and what makes that whole program even more unique is we're the first fund within the climate architecture that is now accessing capital markets. We recently got our clean technology portfolio, that side of our balance sheet, assessed by the credit rating agencies. Moody's and Fitch gave it a AA1, AA+, large part thanks to the work and support of the MDBs. Now we issued our inaugural bond back in earlier this year and raised 500. Preliminary estimates show that we should be able to mobilize an additional 800 to 900 million in concessional money per year. That's again in a leveraging portfolio of 1 to 12. This is a $10 billion additional pool to the investment without any additional ODA dollars. And why is that important? We should all be mindful of the fact that we're here supported by the ODA envelope and recognizing that it's shrunk significantly over the last 2 years. I think about 25%, if not larger. We have to be demonstrating to donorship that we're doing more with what we already have, and that vehicle is going to be important to drive industry and tailored with the very limited and constrained concessional funds that we're raising in parallel.
If I can ask a follow-up.
Sure.
How is this dimension we've been talking here, the just transition, the implications of those sort of hard industrial transitions for workers, and how is that being introduced? And one of the things we've been working, in fact, with Kate and others at the LSE is thinking about how just transition factors get introduced into bond issuance, green bonds, social bonds, and so on. But specifically on your new industrial program, where are the just transition themes coming through there?
No, thanks very much. And I probably didn't emphasize this enough. In fact, besides these large-scale mitigation programs that the CIF finances, we buttress all of our work, not just on the mitigation side, but adaptation, resilience, with a just transitions ethos. In fact, we are probably the largest library resource on just transitions work. We had, in fact, a just transitions initiative that was done in partnership with CSIS and DC, a think tank, that galvanized a lot of these learnings. And I invite you to check it out on our website. It includes case studies, research that has been done in concert with our development country recipients. I mean, these things are all relatively novel, and that work has inspired examining differentiated impacts across these vulnerable groups. Again, indigenous peoples, local communities, women, and it helped in the past spur on one of our only kind of direct access programs, which is called the Dedicated Grant Mechanism. And that program directly supports indigenous people and local communities. I'd encourage you to check it out. Again, we're pretty crappy at branding, so DGM is not really a wonderful acronym, but please do check it out, because it is probably one of the largest global programs, and not just us channeling money through the banks to them. This is them owning the governance structures and making the investment decisions for themselves. In fact, that program is buried within our nature based solutions work and our forestry work. And that program was directly endorsed, in fact, by God rest her soul, Dr. Jane Goodall, who personally endorsed it and partnered with us on that. So those things are a big part of our agenda, and it helps to keep the banks honest on this work, which they've been extremely supportive of, and it helps evolve their own policy thinking and influences the commitments that the boards are making with them as well. I'll stop there.
Fantastic. So this, I mean, that's really good to hear. You're the head, you work on comms, so come up with an exciting name. But
not so much comms. I'm on the fund mobilization side.
fund mobilization. That's even better. That's the most important bit. Thank you. But for example, listening to Haley and this 3 million women-led women trade union in India, would that sort of organization be able to apply through this direct access?
Not so much that one, but we do have one that we've been working with to pair with our Accelerating the Coal Transition program. It's called Walcott Women's Leadership in Affected Coal Communities, and it was primarily funded by complementary funding to ACT that came from Canada. Canada's my home country, and big champion obviously on gender equality, and they were very keen to make sure that these vulnerable groups are not lost. We see the work on coal transition as not about mitigating the use of fossils and making sure that doesn't get locked in, and the chase on net zero is just a part of it, but at the end of the day, this is about people and its development, and as has been much more better articulated by our colleagues here on the panel, if we're not here focused on how they can survive these transitions, whether it's through upskilling, reskilling, balancing against the energy security concerns, making sure that they have jobs and can protect their own families and households, then we're failing. And that's the big push, and that's the big concern, particularly as the global ODA envelope shrinks and gets further constrained.
Brilliant. Okay, Kate, so coming back to you, you gave us one example in agriculture, but maybe you could give us more flavor of the type of things beyond coal that maybe your partner countries are looking for, and where you see the most exciting areas of sort of marrying the climate agenda, but with this more positive social impact agenda.
So, I mean, I think at the core of where we've got to in ADB on just transition is that it's not a risk mitigant framework that needs to come in as a safeguard alongside mitigation or decarbonization, but that actually it's really a key enabler, right? It is if you get it right, it is the thing that will drive more decarbonization, more ambition, more speed. I think if you look broadly at the Asia Pacific region, it is the industrial powerhouse, largest middle class of the global economy, right? And so if you take just transition as an enabler, what is that economic diversification, green economy transformation opportunity for the region and for the countries in the region? And if you look at it, the just transition through that lens, then you see that actually the activities that you want to do, the financing that you want to do, the way you want to transition, whether it's a sector, whether it's a country, whether it's a city, whatever you're trying to transition, or a more micro, like a specific, the salt flats, the objective there is to transition them to a better, more stable economy with better conditions, better jobs and that. And if you come at it from that angle, you realize that actually it is a whole type of investment and activities that are needed to go into it. And so I think we've taken that approach, and then we're trying to apply that through our specific projects to support countries that have very different cases where they want. And I mean, Genevieve, she couldn't join us. She actually just messaged me to say the new text has come out on the just transition, which is why she hasn't joined, because she's in an AOSIS meeting. But when you talk to the Pacific Island countries, as an example, what does just transition mean for them? Well, it's about, how they're going to travel from outer islands. How are they going to get into the region the goods and supplies that they need, the food that they need to continue to develop if it's a decarbonized world versus the current world that they're in? And then beyond that, what potential opportunities do they have? I mean, there's lots of discussion, green hydrogen bunkers, critical minerals in the Pacific. So for them, what is that transition scenario? Where are they going? And then what type of support do they need for that?
Super. We're coming up against time. I think we'll have some time for questions. So I'm just going to pass back to you, Jana. As I said, one of the big themes is actually mobilizing external finance, and half of the 1.3 trillion is supposed to be coming from the private sector. So it'd be really interesting just to think in terms of Finland looking outwards, the companies and investors from Finland into emerging economies. How will you be taking your experience of just transition into the global south?
Yeah, that's the $1 trillion question, I think. 1.3. But anyhow, I think the keyword there is de-risking. We are seeing that it's not about technologies, it's not about knowledge, it's not about the kind of capabilities to adopt these innovations to different places. It's rather that it's not happening because of the cost of capital or the perceived cost of capital because of the perceived risk is too high. So that's kind of to unleash the private flows of money to the investments that are deeply required in the global south. What we need to be able to achieve is to much better leverage on the financial kind of structures that we already have in place. So that's a very large role to the concessional finance, to the blended finance side, and to multilateral development banks. We in Finland, we are also struggling to develop the most efficient ways of doing that, but it's maybe loan guarantees, counterparty risk guarantees, those type of instruments that are a bit less costly in terms of out-of-pocket investments, but rather help kind of get the financial calculus right in order to get to a green light on actually executing on those investments. Some of the technologies that Finland is exporting to the global south include batteries for kind of grid forming capabilities. So in countries where you don't have sufficient grid infrastructure to tap in new industrial investments or new sources of renewable generation, those batteries can be lifesavers in terms of the grid. But then we need the kind of the public interference or the public funds need to step in to guarantee that the financial kind of conditions can be delivered as promised.
And Haley, you gave us one particular example, but thinking about the broader economy, are there other areas which you think need to be prioritized in just transition, particularly from some of the, and what can this conference here do to support that?
It's like you read my mind, Nick. I mean, seeing as we're here in Brazil, in the lungs of the planet, right, in terms of agriculture and the risks that we face societally from deforestation, this is a bit of an inside track, but our fourth story coming in this storytelling series will be looking at a really incredible agroforestry model happening here in Brazil, but which we think is a highly scalable just transition solution that really embraces the opportunities Kate was talking about for driving a new kind of growth and an inclusive form of growth around tropical regions globally. And so this is learning from a company called Belterra here, a Brazilian company that is restoring degraded land into very productive, very diverse biodiverse value chains, by sharing risk and revenue with farmers, investors, and processors. And it's really impressive already in just a couple of years. 2,000 hectares cultivated. That's about 2,500 football fields, to give you a sense of scale. 80 producers are in their lease model, 230 more receiving the kind of technical assistance they need to power their own growth, and another 50 family farms under their philanthropic institute. So the equivalent of just those 360 families already captured in the first 4 years of this business is the annual equivalent of erasing all emissions from the state of Para, where we are here at COP30. So imagine again that impact for people and planet globally if this was scaled across tropical forests around the world. Their target ultimately is 20,000 hectares in the next 4 years. So it's a very quick turnaround in terms of benefits to farmers, their income, their dignity at work, in shade, in biodiverse regions, but also for their return. 10 times more profitable than monoagriculture soy, 40 times more profitable than deforestation driving cattle, and as I say, cash positive in 4 years. So I think for me, one of the biggest things we can take away and really inject from this COP is the leadership of the Brazilians in really trying to inject a sense, not so much of consensus, which at times can, I think, strangle, given how complex all of this is, but really looking at how do we orchestrate and how do we really learn from the people and the real examples happening on the ground. Not quite so focused on kind of the KPIs and metrics today, but really the human dimensions of what's working and what's not. So we can advance that kind of peer-to-peer learning. And warts and all, acknowledging leadership while creating safe environments to share mistakes that will inevitably be made. I think that's the path to advancing at scale.
So breakthrough ideas, that's really good. So we have a few minutes left in the audience. I don't know if there are any questions that people have. Looks like people are enjoying their TV. Any questions for anyone? Okay, so I'm going to ask some questions, but you still have a chance. Anjali over there, you can ask a question if you want. So we're here at COP, as we've heard, and what do we need to get out of COP vis-a-vis just transition, and particularly finance, to take this forward? We've got the new text, ideas around some Baku action mechanism for just transition, but maybe we need more than that. So Jacob, if I may, start with you. What would you like to see in terms of this agenda, particularly that actually just transition is becoming quite practical now? What would you like to see in terms of your funds, the partners you have, and the communities you serve?
Well, if this isn't being recorded, I could be more frank, but you know, I think within that global context of the aid pool shrinking significantly, we have to be bold about our convictions that about this really matters. At the end of the day, people, the climate finance development, the climate finance budget. This is about people. And we have to be able to stand up to push back on what's seemingly insignificant issues of language and concern, which many organizations are having to scrub and to hide out of fear. And we also have to lower the burden of access. We certainly don't do ourselves any favors with a very complicated aid architecture, not just within the multilateral universe, but specifically within the climate finance architecture. I was half joking when I was referring to it as the alphabet soup, but at the end of the day, we're not here to compete against each other for that shrinking envelope. It's how do we make this easier for our developing country partners and recipients to understand, to navigate, and to be able to access. And so if there's something I'd wish, it's, I know there's about 1,000 or more climate negotiators somewhere in the room, but is that the best use of this limited circus when the finance folks and the MDBs are sometimes not always fully immersed into that equation, and whether we like it or not, those are the biggest chess pieces on the board in the ODA universe. And it's easy to get a bit jaded about this, but we have to commit ourselves and we have to dig in. So those would be my parting 2 cents of wisdom.
No, that's great. And I think if we know that many developing countries find it hard to access funds, the governments find it hard. So if we're thinking about communities and others, they're going to find it even harder. So Kate, you've been working on this for a while. There will be something on just transition. But more broadly, from what you've been listening and talking to governments, what do you want to come out of this COP to take you into 26?
So I think where the just transition discussions have been difficult is that it's effectively the moral dimension of climate action. And so everybody has their own interpretation of morality and what's right and wrong. And so it's essential that it's there, but that makes it very difficult to move forward to implementation. So I think maybe I like what Haley said, that consensus, we are never going to all reach consensus on what a just transition is, but why do we continue to try to pursue that through this process? It is much more about just getting on and recognizing that if we don't put finance to this dimension, the rest will not be successful. So let's just get on and push on with the kind of practical implementation of it.
Okay, practical implementation. What has been very noticeable here in this COP is business has been around, but it hasn't been saying much. It's been very quiet. So what is the signal that businesses back on Monday that they need to hear from you to say, keep with it, show leadership, because this is important for you and your stakeholders?
Yeah. Well, actually, just this morning, we from the Confederation of Finnish Industries, together with our Nordic colleagues, we actually released our position on COP30. What we're calling for is action and implementation from the governments. Kind of what's lacking and what's needed is kind of predictability on the developments of both policies and markets. And what was the major achievement of Paris Agreement was that it actually brought predictability and long-term outlook for climate policy. So we're headed towards 1.5. That's the goal where we want to go. And now businesses are kind of shifting their investments to that direction. Despite all the fuss and kind of changing pieces of the puzzle in geopolitics and in individual countries, what needs to be delivered from Belém is a strong and consistent message that we are serious with the climate action and we will pursue emission reductions at a pace that's required to deliver us to less than 2 degrees of global heating. That's what we told our governments, that's what we told the European Union, and that's what we hope to tell to the presidency as well.
Well, I hope that every business association is saying exactly the same thing to all their governments. Finally, so Haley, you've given some signals here. We need to have real breakthrough leadership. So a lot of emphasis has been put on the action agenda beyond the negotiations, which can lead to quite awkward conclusions. So where do you see maybe particularly the action agenda or the action piece coming out of the COP?
I mean, I just really welcome it, I suppose. I mean, it's one of the best aspects, I think, of the Brazilian presidency's leadership in shaping this COP system, trying to shake it up to a certain extent and really emphasize action. So I guess long may it continue, long may we deepen the emphasis on action, but specifically people-centered action and what it means, as you started by saying, Nick, not just to not leave people behind, but really to create the openings for them to exercise their own agency. Because when you do, you get far more durable transitions that automatically build in resilience because of people thriving in the process, not resisting change that is otherwise deeply fearful, but really seeing their place in it and what they can do to power the transition. So I'll leave it there.
Well, fantastic. Thanks for this masterclass. Or certainly on my earphones, I've been getting a very interesting another meeting from another agenda. So it's always good to have stereo at these meetings. But I'd like to thank you, Jacob from CIF, you, Kate from ADB for hosting us, Janne from Finland, and Haley from the Institute of Human Rights and Business. And I think actually this gives us a very practical agenda to move from the sort of moral philosophy of just transition to improving and people's lives. Thank you.